NetsBoy, so let's hear what he has to say. His name is NetsBoy, he thinks the world is all over when the Nets just can't play. What up, Net fans? NetsBoy here, bring your latest in your Brooklyn Nets news. All right, so we got a lot to talk about in this episode. I'm going to try to keep it as fast as I possibly can because it's been over 2 weeks since my last NetsBoy episode. You know the whole spiel. NetsBoy's always really busy with his day job, and I tried to find some time to do some episodes, and I wanted to try to do one a week ago, and then something happened, and I wasn't able to do it. All this stuff, blah, blah, blah. You hear it all the time from me. And then by the time I had a chance to do it, there was like 2 games left of the regular season. And I'm like, I might as well just wait until the end of the regular season, see where these Nets are in the standings, and just talk about the play-in. Because we all knew the Nets were going to be in the play-in, but it was just going to be a matter of where were they going to finish in the play-in, 7, 8, 9, or 10, which they had a chance to finish everywhere these last couple games. So, I don't want to harp a lot about the last games since my last episode, because there was 8 of them. Like I said, NetsBoy's been MIA for a while. And, in that 8-game stretch, the Nets went 6-2, which, if you remember, I said they had to go 7-1, and the only loss that I was going to allow them to have was against the Bucks, which the Nets did indeed lose to. It was a hard-fought game and a very impressive win with Giannis making a step-back 3 to tie the game. We're going to touch upon that in a second because that just once again goes with the terrible defense that the Nets have. That was the game that I expected them to lose, where I gave them a pass. But then they had that really upsetting loss against the Hawks, a game in which the Nets defense is just a joke, which once again, we knew that. But when it's all said and done, they finished, the rest of the games on a 4-game winning streak, and they ended up being 44-38 and are currently in the 7th spot, and will be in the play-in tournament as the 7th seed, and will be playing the Cavs in Brooklyn, in which they only need to win 1 game to advance to the actual playoff round. So before we talk about the play-in and what the matchups that we're going to see with the Cavs, and don't want to look too ahead of ourselves because the Nets could very easily lose in the play-in. But we'll talk about, like I said, we'll talk about the play in a second. I just want to obviously address the elephant in the room with this Nets team, and it was very evident even in the games in which they won against teams like the Pistons and teams like the Pacers and the Knicks and the Rockets. They all had the same type of format, right? Nets come out, they play really well, they establish a double-digit lead, their defense just implodes, the other team makes a run, takes the lead back, and then the Nets have to remember who they are and pull away and win at the end. Actually, the Knicks game was like the last time the Nets played the Knicks. They found themselves down by 21 points, and then they came back to win. So that one was a little bit different. But regardless, the same things keep happening with this Nets team, and that is their inability to play defense. And then we touched upon it in my last NetsBoy episode. I said the Nets defense had a chance to keep them out of the playoffs. Here they are now in the play-in. Very good chance of making it into the playoffs. But this defense is still a disaster. And it's the same crap. It's the same 3 things over and over again, though one of them was addressed, and that was James Johnson. Now, James Johnson was waived by the Nets, so the Nets could sign Kessler Edwards to a full contract, a regular roster contract, so he could play in the postseason. This was the move I love. Look, James Johnson I was getting sick of, okay? For every good thing he does like 7 bad things. And I hate those players. His offensive game is extremely inconsistent. And honestly, for someone who's supposed to be this great versatile defender, every time he was in, he made some kind of dumb defensive lapse, or he'd be flat-footed on defense and let, the perimeter player blow right past him. Like, I had some videos of that Hawks game, which was probably one of the worst losses I've seen the Nets have in a long time. And I was just watching. There were so many times like Bogdanovich just drove past the supposedly great defensive-minded James Johnson, and James Johnson just swipes at him and fouls him. Like, what kind of defense is that? Like, I was sick of James Johnson. I'm so glad he's off the team. I'll do a little NetsBoy salute. Thanks, James Johnson. You had some moments here and there, but whatever. Like, I'm so glad he's gone. And I love Kessler Edwards. I think he has the perfect fit for this Nets team. He's 6'8", he's long, he's athletic, he can shoot the three-point shot, he brings some energy, has a little boneheaded plays every once in a while, but he's a rookie, you know. I just think that he's a good fit for this Nets team, and I think it was a great move by Sean Marks to let James Johnson go and let Kessler Edwards have his chance. And I think Edwards is going to be a big factor for the Nets, especially in the play-in and maybe even in the actual playoffs. So that was one of the major disasters on the defensive end that the Nets kind of fixed a little bit. And that was James Johnson, because he's awful. The other thing is the unnecessary switching that the Nets do. And look, I get it. This is Steve Nash's philosophy. Switch 1 through 5. That's what he wants to do. And I understand why he does it with the players that he has. But there are some switches that just should not happen. And once again, I'll go back to that Hawks game. There was a play where Kyrie Irving was guarding, it wasn't Trae Young, it was another guard. I don't remember who it was. Some guard, point guard, or some guard, right? Gallinari sets a screen on Kyrie. And when I say he sets a screen, I mean he just kind of stands next to Kyrie. Doesn't get up next to Kyrie, doesn't play aggressive, just kind of like stands next to him. Doesn't even really set the screen pick. Like he doesn't even, get in the pick position. He's just standing there. And the ball handler casually dribbles into the screen. And for no reason, instead of just fighting through the screen or lack thereof or trying to switch, or trying to stay on his man, Kyrie, and I believe it was James Johnson at the time, the great defensive James Johnson, decided to switch. And now Kyrie is guarding Gallinari in the post. And there's no switchback, there's no help, so they give the ball to Gallinari, he pushes Kyrie back down to the baseline, and it's basically an uncontested layup, but Kyrie fouls him instead, and Gallinari goes to the line and shoots 2 free throws. And I'm just screaming at the TV, why are you switching? There's no need to switch. It wasn't an aggressive screen. It was extremely casual. It was nonchalant. It literally was lazy defense. It was like, oh, well, coach wants us to switch, so I guess we'll switch here. Every time the Nets switch, they provide a mismatch for the offense's favor. Like that happened, especially in that Hawks game. The offense wants you to switch like that if you're the offense because you want the mismatch. Kyrie, Seth Curry, Patty Mills, those guys are too small. Dragic, when he comes back, they're too small to be guarding these 6'8" and bigger guys on these switches. It's what the offense wants you to do. So why do you always do it? Figure something else out. Go to a zone. Or maybe switch and then quickly switch back with some help defense rotating on the other side. It's just the dumbest thing in the world. It's like, oh, well, we're switching now. Now, Kyrie's on Gallinari. Good job, Kyrie. You can do it. That's stupid, dumb defense. So that's something the Nets also constantly do. And then the last thing is, with their poor defense, overhelp. I'm sorry. Overhelp to the fullest extreme. Listen, there needs to be help defense when you're a weak defensive team like the Nets are. I just touched upon if the Nets do switch like that and Kyrie is guarding someone who's twice his height, that there has to be some help defense rotating. But only one player. If you watch when the Nets defense just implodes, there's one player gets into the paint and the entire 5 players on the Nets just crash in on him, leaving a perimeter of open jump shooters just ready to shoot the 3. You don't need 4 guys to collapse in on one player. You don't. Trust the help. If a pick and roll happens and the roll and the pick player, and the guard is penetrating, trust the help. The two players, the guy who set a screen and the guard, should be the only two that try to guard that player. Maybe you can get some weak side help, but that's it. 2, maybe 3 players helping, not the entire team. I mean, overhelp is just what this Nets team does. And that's why they get burned by the three-point shot so much, because when you overhelp and the players make the right play on the offensive end, there's going to be a wide open shooter. Just trust your defense. Go to the Kenny Atkinson philosophy of defense. Remember that? What was Kenny Atkinson's philosophy? If you remember, it was give up the tough contested twos and guard the rim and the three-point line. So if that means that Trae Young or any other point guard, has to make a mid-range jump shot or a floater, we'll take those chances instead of letting him get right to the basket or collapse it and give out the open three. It was an analytical, the defense philosophy, but you want to know something? It worked a bit with the Nets when Kenny Atkinson was the coach. But Steve Nash wants to just switch everything and have everyone overcommit and help and leave wide open shooters and mismatches galore. Can you try a zone more often? I mean, the Nets started doing zone towards the end of the last few games, occasionally, but that's what they've got to do. They've got to play more of a zone. It's the only way. But the problem is, when they were playing zone and there was some one defensive lapse and there was some penetration, the entire zone just collapsed in on the guy again. So it defeated the whole purpose of the zone because the entire offense all the shooters were open. So that's the other problem. You go to a zone, that works, except the players need to be smart enough to know what they're supposed to do in the zone. So this is obviously the biggest issue with the Nets come this the play-in tournament and possibly the playoffs. It's the biggest question mark. It's what everyone's saying. KD and Kyrie, they might be able to combine for 80 points, but the Nets will still lose 120 to 125 because they can't play any defense. And that is very true. So, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that in the playoffs, defensive intensity increases. And we saw the Nets last year be one of the worst defensive teams in the league. And then all of a sudden, come the playoff time, they were top 5. So that can happen. And, look, the end of the day, the Nets are really just going to go as far as I feel like KD and Kyrie can take them. As much as I want to believe in Seth Curry and, Bruce Brown and Nick Claxton and Kessler Edwards and, the rest of the guys on the team, Patty Mills, I just don't know how good some of these players are going to be. Andre Drummond, I just don't know. I actually have a lot of faith in Seth Curry, but his ankle has been an issue. He didn't play the last few games because of an ankle injury. That's a big question mark. But outside of Seth Curry, the rest of the Nets, I don't know how much I trust in the postseason. Maybe Bruce Brown a bit because he kind of proven it, but Andre Drummond scares me because he can be a little bit of a head case sometimes. Kessler Edwards is a rookie. Patty Mills either makes all his threes or misses all his threes. Claxton, as good as he is, he's a little sporadic and a little almost too over the top sometimes. So I don't really know what to expect. There is speculation, though, that Ben Simmons might be available if the Nets make it to the first round of the playoffs, which would be cool. But I don't even want to really talk about that because we've heard this story already with Ben Simmons. So, if he can play, that'd be great. But overall, he's not going to be in the play-in. He's already been ruled out, so what good is that? So, look, if the Nets can play decent defense in the upcoming play-in game against the Cavs, they will win. Because the Cavs are a good team, but without Jared Allen, and I don't know if he's going to play in the play-in. I would assume he would. I feel like he was close before when the Nets played him, and which the Nets won. without Jared Allen, the Cavs are just not the same type of team, especially on the defensive end. So I just feel like in that matchup against the Cavs, which the Nets will be in, as long as they can play decent defense and frustrate Darius Garland a little bit and the rest of the Cavs, I feel pretty confident that the Nets will be able to win that game. That being said, I would not be surprised if the Nets lose that game because we've seen this team lose games they should win, whether it's against the Hornets or against the Hawks. You know, I was actually surprised they did beat the Cavs when they had to because that was a must-win. So, look, in a single-game elimination, or it's not really a single game because the Nets will have 2 tries to win one game, but still, in a situation like that, the Nets could very easily lose. I will say this. I don't really think the Nets will lose 2 games in a row. Granted that if the Nets do lose to the Cavs, they'll probably play the Hawks. I would assume the Hawks are going to beat the Hornets, but you never know. But it's funny because the Hawks and Hornets both beat the Nets, just a couple weeks ago. So whoever it is, they could beat the Nets as well. I mean, there is a possibility the Nets don't even make it to the actual playoffs, first round. I really don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think Kevin Durant's going to let that happen. But you never know because this defense is just so bad. Just so bad. Like, why can't Steve Nash and the coaching staff figure something else out? And, because you can't tell me that they have a good defensive philosophy. The players aren't just executing. That's wrong because their philosophy of this over switching and over helping is not right. And you can't tell me that's not what they're trying to do. Steve Nash is trying to say, hey, we don't have a good enough defensive team, so we need to switch and help as much as we can. That's a bad message. It should be the exact opposite. Let's stop switching. Let's fight through screens. Let's play drop coverage when we have someone like Andre Drummond, instead of him switching and giving Giannis a chance to do a step-back 3. That was the Bucks game. I said I was going to touch upon that, but whatever. Let's play drop coverage and force them to make tough contested 2s. How about that? Whatever. So, anyway, Cavs game, Nets, in Brooklyn, Tuesday night. Listen, and like I said, anything can happen. I do believe the Nets should be able to win that game and should be the 7th seed come playoff time. But like I said, listen, if Jared Allen doesn't play, the Nets definitely need to win that game and definitely should win that game. If Jared Allen does play, like I said, the Cavs are like a completely different team then. I think that could be some trouble for the Nets, but I do still want to believe the Nets should be able to beat the Cavs. If they do lose, I'm most likely predicting them to play the Hawks. I don't know. Trae Young and the rest of the Hawks are a dangerous team. If they play the Hornets, once again, the Nets should be able to win that game. The Lonzo Ball is very talented, and the Hornets, had their way with the Nets last time they played them. So I really don't know, but I do feel pretty good about the Nets winning at least one of the 2 games in the play-in, whether it's the first game or the next one. So I do believe the Nets should be in the first round of the playoffs, either as the 7 or the 8 seed, which means they would have a matchup against either the Heat or the Celtics. The Heat if they're the 8 seed, the Celtics if they're the 7 seed. We'll talk about that if that were to happen on my next NetsBoy episode, which will probably be right after the play-in. Let me know what you guys think about everything. If you agree with me about the defensive philosophy the Nets have being wrong, about the mistakes on the overcommitment with the help, defense, and the unnecessary switching, and if you agree with me that you think the Nets should beat the Cavs in the play-in and be the 7 seed, but at the same time, they could still lose. But if you also agree with me, though, in the sense that you expect the Nets to make it to the first round. If the Nets do lose 2 games in a row, first against the Cavs and then either the Hawks or the Hornets, and do not even make the regular playoffs, this would be one of the biggest disappointments in the history of NetsBoy and my Nets fandom. And if that were to happen, Steve Nash would need to be fired the next day. I don't care what anybody says. But once again, we're not going to talk about that. We're not even going to think about that because that's not going to happen. Nets are going to win. Nets are going to beat the Cavs, and they're going to be the 7th seed. And then they're going to play the Celtics, which will be a fun series. Okay? That's what I'm going to think. Positive thoughts. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up this episode. Once again, let me know what you guys think about everything. And keep your eyes open to the next NetsBoy right after the play-in series. Hopefully, we'll be talking about a playoff, a series against the Celtics or the Heat, and we'll go from there. So until then, this is NetsBoy. Just asking the Nets to figure out how to play some damn defense and signing off.